Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm Katie. I'm the founder of Cheribim. Cheribim was founded about 2 years ago with the purpose of making relevant tech accessible for historic buildings. And that was really a product of my insights working with historic buildings, and in particular churches, where I saw lots of inefficiencies and poor economies in the way that information was being managed in particular, and opportunity for, in many cases, quite straightforward tech to be adopted, specifically in an accessible way, so that this could be addressed for historic buildings. So the title of my talk is Data for Hard Problems, and that is because of this information management context that I'm working in. And particularly because there are lots of hard problems that are faced with historic buildings. To give you some of the kind of macro information on that, with our first niche of church buildings, there are 15,000 listed church buildings in England, and they represent 45% of all grade 1s, so that's the highest level of protection afforded to the most important buildings, so nearly half of those are church buildings. In 2021, the Church of England reported that it was facing £1 billion worth of repairs and maintenance by 2026 across all of these historic buildings. And recent research has quantified that across an inspection cycle, which is typically 5 years, the cost to address those maintenance and repairs, if they're left unattended, will increase by 25%. And so by 2026, if those repairs haven't been addressed, there will be a £250 million accrual of cost on top of that billion. In spite of this, churches deliver £55 billion worth of social value per year through food banks and other types of community services, very localised, and in addition, just to add to the hard problems faced, the Church of England and other Christian denominations in England have also committed to transition these highly complex, important buildings to net zero by 2030. All of this is being taken on predominantly by volunteers who are left to manage decisions around resource allocation, what maintenance and repairs they're going to address, how they're going to fund that, who they're going to ask to fund that, and all sorts of really difficult decisions. They're typically not from a facilities management or event management background, let alone a historic buildings specialists. They'll receive often conflicting advice about what is most important for their historic buildings and how they can solve issues and how much it's going to cost. And so in terms of hard problems faced, they really bear the brunt of it. In the context then of transitioning to net zero, there's also a lot of complexity around how to navigate adapting these buildings and improving their thermal performance, not least because we know that the way that thermal performance is typically modelled is not fit for purpose for historic buildings. So this is a quote from Historic England and their comments on simulations of fabric performance for historic buildings. And they say poor performance, which is what is generally assumed of historic buildings, is based upon predictive modelling tools whose reliability in assessing the real performance of traditional buildings can vary widely depending on the information used for simulations. And so what that's really getting at is the fact that ratings such as EPCs, which are most commonly adopted, are typically they typically use standardised values which are quite reductive and based on new construction, which performs quite differently to traditional fabric. So this is one of the things that we're looking to tackle. We're very, very pleased to be in partnership with the Diocese of Sheffield and have been funded by Innovate UK to try to address the lack of specific data which can be used to understand better the thermal performance of these buildings. We now have temperature and humidity sensors installed internally and externally at 79 churches across South Yorkshire. And I spoke at Smart Sheffield, which Chris also recorded a couple of months ago, about how we're going about gathering the data and the sorts of uses that is already providing for people on the ground making decisions about how they're going to optimise the management of their buildings so that they perform better in that transition to net zero. And another way that we're also tackling this is we know that it's super important to contextualise those temperature and humidity readings, and so we've also just come to the conclusion actually of a short feasibility project in partnership with Sheffield Hallam, where we've been looking at the use of large language models for extracting key information from existing inspection reports, which have been undertaken every 5 years for the last 70 years by law. So a really rich source of information about the context of how the building fabric is modulating between the exterior and interior environment, and what factors might be contributing to that. So we know that condition, material, layout, size, and of course use, which won't be contained in these reports, but is also a super important factor. And so we're working also with building managers to see how they can capture how they're using the building and any observations that they have about signs about how it's actually performing thermally. However, this is all very well and good, but we know that artificial intelligence models have baked into them limitations. Somebody somewhere down the line has made assumptions or decisions about what is important to contribute to the model. And that's why, in addition to all of this, we're thinking lots about how we can respond to the fact that the people on the ground aren't just making decisions on the basis of rational logic. They're not just saying if the air temperature is this, then I'll definitely be comfortable. We know that they aren't comfortable, and they just need to know how they can inform the decisions that they then take a little bit better. And so I have really enjoyed recently reading a book, Escape from Model Land by Erica Thompson, in which she points out that even without predictive accuracy, models can still hold benefits. And actually what's important is that discussions about the future must be based on common ground. So this is something that's really leading how we are thinking about the predictive models and simulations that we're doing with all of this data that we're gathering, and trying to build into that ways that people on the ground can feedback their observations, and that can potentially influence the model and the direction that we go in it and how we present that information back to them. So this is my email address if you'd like to get in touch with me about, well, really about any of that. Environmental monitoring in historic buildings, how we're thinking about how we're presenting these predictive models to users and how we might influence their direction on that basis. But also a general ask, I'm looking for a mentor for one of my tech team who is really involved in this machine learning. So if you think that this is an interesting problem and you would like to be involved, please also get in touch about that. Thank you.